Welcome, or hopefully welcome back to the Reluctant Entrepreneur Podcast, the show where we dive into the unexpected journeys of business builders, innovators, and creators who took the leap into entrepreneurship, sometimes reluctantly, but always with purpose. Today, I'm joined by Scott Trumpolt. Scott is the founder of Trumpolt Compensation Design Solutions, a consultancy dedicated to helping organizations attract, motivate, and retain top talent through smart, customized compensation strategies. With years of experience in human resources and compensation design, Scott has worked with companies of all sizes, from fast-growing startups to large global enterprises across a broad range of industries. Before launching his own firm, Scott served in senior compensation roles at several companies where he developed a reputation for aligning pay practices with business performance, culture, and long-term strategic goals. His expertise spans executive compensation, incentive design, salary benchmarking, pay equity, and total rewards strategy. Scott is known for his pragmatic, data-driven approach and his ability to translate complex compensation issues into clear, actionable solutions. He founded Trumpolt Compensation Design Solutions to give companies access to high-quality, customized compensation support without the overhead of a large consulting firm. Scott's path to entrepreneurship wasn't born out of a desire to run a business for business's sake, but from a deep understanding of a problem that needed solving: how companies design, implement, and manage compensation plans that actually work. In the first half of our conversation, I'll ask Scott about his journey from the leap into business ownership to the highs and lows and lessons learned along the way. Then, in the second half, we'll get into what he knows best: compensation strategy. We'll talk about the differences in expectations between baby boomers and millennials and how a well-crafted comp plan can attract top talent, and the surprising ways in which companies often get compensation wrong. If you're a business owner, HR leader, or just curious about smart compensation design and how it can impact everything from recruitment to retention, this episode is for you. Let's jump into it. Hi, Scott. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I've had a business for 33 years, and I think for the first good 20, I got compensation all wrong. But you probably already knew that. I'm sure that's the life you live in every day. Helping companies to untangle the mess they got themselves into. But before we go down that road, tell me a little bit about your journey prior to starting your company. I covered a little bit of your background, but jump into more specifics for me if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. I was in corporate world for about 18 years, focusing on HR, but primarily compensation. I did have a few stints in the more generalist world, you might say, but primarily compensation. And the last stop I made in my corporate career was working over in Germany in what was called a center of excellence. So these were people from different parts of different divisions within the company. It was a very large global firm. And so I was assigned to this group to work on particular issues, trying to bring together different countries, different work cultures that were all part of the same company. And what I found during my time there, which wasn't too long, about a year, I had been with the parent company for about 7 years. But what I found was, as I continued to go up the corporate ladder, I was actually getting more and more away from the things that I love to do in compensation, the kind of hands-on compensation, and working more on administrative tasks, perhaps people leadership tasks. And I actually felt that my skills were starting to deteriorate a little bit. And the other thing was, I was over there by myself. My wife stayed here back in Florida. So that and the nature of the role that I was doing, sitting in meetings where we would spend an hour and a half talking about what the title of the project should be, started to get to me. And this is the kind of thing with my life. I really need kind of a big trigger to give me a nudge and to move in a new direction. And so that's what I decided to do. I said, I've got a lot of contacts, people that know my work. that have moved on to greener pastures. Perhaps I could hook up with them and do my own thing. And so it was really not so much thought out strategically over a long period of time, but it was more like, if I can't do this now with the experiences that I've had, I probably never will. So let's give it a shot.
Yeah, it's funny how fate, destiny, the business gods, whatever label we want to put on it, kind of take away all our options, and the last remaining option is start your own business. That was my journey. Hence the name of the show, The Reluctant Entrepreneur. So it wasn't you weren't one of these kids that grew up, running lemonade stands and selling popcorn and recycling bottles for people for cash.
No,
And
no,
you weren't
no,
like a born entrepreneur, right?
no. I became one out of, as I said, some of the circumstances that I talked about, but I have not regretted it.
Well, that's good. Well, was there, or has there ever been a specific moment when you realized that working for yourself was the right plan, or was there a lot of doubt or any degree of doubt after you, as I like to say, jumped into the deep end of the cold pool?
Well, there was certainly doubt because I hadn't done that before, and I think one of the big concerns that I had was just being on my own. I was used to being a corporate creature, and to some degree, knowing where my next paycheck was coming from.
Right.
But beyond the money aspects, just the idea of everything on my shoulders, it scared me, but it also intrigued me. And I felt like I had had enough, and I had worked with some consultants before, not doing consulting, but working around alongside them, and I would pick their brain a little bit over the years. So to answer your question, though, I felt probably within a year when I started to eclipse what I was making. I had a pretty fast track up, but again, after 18 years of doing the kind of things that I did and making the contacts that I did, I really felt that I had a good fighting chance. And so there wasn't a whole lot of struggle. So when it got to the point where I was getting consistently uh, good work and exciting work, that's when I knew I made the right decision.
That's good. It's funny you mentioned that, you went up the ladder pretty fast. We used to unwittingly practice this art, if you will, of promoting people to their level of incompetency. Not that that
Yes.
happened to you, but like, Scott, you're really good at this. We want you to do that. And then you
Yeah.
excel in that and you go, Scott, you're really good at that. We want you to do this other thing. And then eventually we keep moving you up the ladder to something either you're not good at or you're not happy with. And then either way,
Right.
we lose you, right? And that's
Yeah.
kind of what happened to you,
Yes.
right? I mean, only you took the leap rather than them pushing you out the window.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the fact that in my area of expertise, which is really a niche area,
Hmm.
um, I really couldn't aspire to be a top corporate executive because it wasn't broad enough. It was very much a specialization.
Sure.
So I kind of knew that I could keep doing this, but I felt like, the last thing I want to do is be bored. I want to be challenged.
Right.
And so when I came back, the other thing that I did was, although I had had the experience, I got myself certified as a global remuneration professional. I took a bunch of exams just to get uh, to test myself out. I had done these things from an experience standpoint, but to actually prove on paper that the things I was doing, I understood well, and I thought that would help jumpstart my career a little bit as well. So I did a little bit of preparation. It wasn't completely fly by the seat of my pants, but pretty close.
You called it a remuneration expert? What
Yeah, global
what is that?
remuneration.
What is a remuneration expert?
Yes, that is just a fancy word for compensation.
Ah, okay.
And
Okay.
how
In that context. Yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and from a global perspective, because I had worked on global projects and I wanted to continue to do that as well as, in the United States. But the program just gave a little bit more of a flavor of global issues,
Hmm.
which I wanted to be aware of and to be certified in. So
We're
not
gonna go
dramatically different.
we're gonna go down the compensation rabbit hole in a little bit in the second half of
Yeah.
the show, but because it came into mind now, if I don't ask it, I'll forget it. Are there differences culturally in compensation expectations and practices in North America versus in Europe versus in Asia, or Latin
Oh,
America
and
or
absolutely.
wherever? Yeah,
Absolutely. Just quickly to take an example. In in Europe, they have these workers' councils, and everybody's locked in as far as their bonus. It's an expectation that they're going to get this. It's not really performance based. Yes, they want to do well and everything, but it's pretty much a guaranteed in a lot of places. Where here, you may get a bonus, you may not. But having said that, while there are cultural differences and business differences, and you use local compensation sources to determine the value of what a job pays, and there could be differences there, there is a lot of uniformity and alignment in terms of linking career development. You have a career development pathway that's very similar for a certain job as in the US. And each level pays more because more is expected of you, broader aspects of the job that you manage. So there is a lot of overlap. And that's great from a consulting perspective, because one of the questions you should ask yourself is, how far is your work going to travel? Are you going, even though I work in a niche area, any kind of company you can think of pays people to do work, and that job has a certain market value.
mm,
So it doesn't matter if it's a manufacturing industry or uh, any other kind of business, healthcare or whatever, there's a place. So I think one of the questions to ask yourself again is this idea: how far will my work travel? How many, how much will the opportunities increase for me? How big
sure.
is the playing field?
I like that mindset rather than how much more can I make? What I'm hearing you say is how much more can I earn? How much more
Yeah.
can I do to make more, right? Rather
Well,
than
the
rather
money
than
com-
just automatic, every year everyone gets a 5% raise or every year someone gets a $2,000 bonus or whatever. I like the idea of linking. I love the idea of value-based pay, not schedule-based pay, right? But that's kind of Pollyannish, I suppose. What was your biggest fear or hesitation before starting your own business? I mean, you did this later in your life, not earlier in your life, right? You weren't 18 years old when you started your own business, so you could have done it at any time before that. And I know that the situation opened the door up, but what was your? You must have had some trepidation, some concern. What were those concerns? What were the fears?
Well, the biggest concern was just having everything on your shoulders.
Mm,
As I mentioned before, in a way, when you work in corporate, there is even though you can be let go at any time, while you're there, there is a certain stability. And so my biggest concern was uh, just having all of that responsibility on my shoulders. But then I thought, well, it's for myself, and the only person I can blame is myself. So it was balanced by having more control over my work life, a lot more control. But there were growing pains. For example, I suddenly found I was used to being around other people on a daily basis, and now I was just by myself, and I had to make certain lifestyle changes. I found that when I was in the uh, the corporate world, I was moving around a lot, and here I am working from home, and my weight exploded for a while. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get a treadmill in here so that I'm not so sedentary. I mean, these are just little things, but there was transition, is what I'm trying to say. Transition and growing pains, but ultimately, it was just this idea of having everything on my shoulders. And also, I tend to be, or I've conquered it pretty well, but I used to be someone that would always be looking ahead. So I'm thinking, which is not really a good thing to do, to look too far down the road. Say if I go through a dry patch with my work and then starting to think, well, how long is this going to go on? And this could happen or this could happen.
right.
You've got to be patient with yourself. Those are the kind of challenges I had.
Yeah. You talk about you know uh, security. I think you used the word or something similar to that. there's this perception that I don't want to leave my 9 to 5 because I've got a kind of a guaranteed paycheck, and someone else is worrying about the other stuff, and all I have to do is show up and do a great job, and I'm good. Yet the amount of control that they have over their destiny is very not dependent on themselves. It's dependent upon the company's ability to make good decisions. It's based on the leadership. It's based on people above you, and below you. You actually have very little control when you work for a company. You could be doing a stellar job. You could be a rock star. You could be deserving of every bonus, and then all of a sudden they have a downsizing, and you're one of them, or they go bankrupt, or they whatever. So
Exactly.
there is risk when you go out on your own. Clearly, there's a ton of risk when you go out on your own, but you do have a lot more control over your destiny and your success than you would if you were relying on, if you're one person out of 8,000 versus one person out of one. Now, it doesn't mean you're not going to fail, but what it means is that you are 100% responsible for your success, and you are 100% responsible for your failure, as opposed to sharing the load. And it's the difference between driving the bus and being a passenger on the bus. Yeah, bad things can still happen, but at least you have a little bit more control. You can see the road in front of you. You have control of the steering wheel and the brake and the accelerator and all that stuff, where you wouldn't if you were a cog in a wheel. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Most people are, and I was for years and years and years. And as were you.
Sure. So was I.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all putting your eggs in one basket. Again, we're talking about risk, but you're absolutely right. At any given time, you can be let go. Whereas during COVID, for example, when a lot of businesses, I still had 7 or 8 revenue streams coming in. And yeah, sure, maybe I'd lose 2 or 3, but I'd gain 1 or 2 over here to compensate. And as long as you keep plugging and you're delivering what people value, I think you're going to be okay.
Yeah, I totally agree. What were some of the early challenges you faced in getting your business off the ground?
Recognition, trying to figure out what was the best way to promote myself. Was it attending conferences? Was it having a website? That it is still an ongoing issue because I got a lot of my work. I still get a lot of my work through people that knew me. They would refer me to other people. And then those people, once they got to know my work and I was successful with them, they would refer me on. But there was always a challenge in trying to get cold business because what I do is very much a niche type of thing, and people would get confused. Well, are you doing workers' compensation? Are you kind of an accountant? Kind of confused about what I did and trying to convince them of that value. So one of the struggles was to create cold business, really. But fortunately, I had a lot of contacts again that believed in me, so that kept me on the road. And so when ultimately I started to get a few clients outside of my fan base, if you will, that made me feel like I was moving in the right direction.
Yeah, that's where the proof comes. When I started my business, I was in our industry for several years before that, so people knew who I was, and I had an instant potential customer base, lead base, right?
Yeah.
And we call it, the kids, the younger people who are listening to this or watching this might wonder what I mean by this, but you go through your Rolodex very quickly, your contact list very quickly, and once that's burned out, that's when it gets real, right? It's like, okay, everyone who owed me a favor has paid off. Now it's can this thing sustain itself? But it's good starter fluid. I mean, you cash in on every chip you have out there, right? It's like starter fluid down the carburetor. It's super high octane, but it can't last long. So but it does get you started. What was your first major win that as an entrepreneur after you started your business that made you feel like you were on the right track?
I started to allude to this. It's when I got that first big client that was not through a direct source. just I had to really prove myself. And when I did that, and I had been commissioned to build a pay structure project and a career architecture. I know we're going to get into that a little bit later, but basically doing what I do for them for the United States. And then I got to go over to China to their facility there and recreate it, but fit it more to the local culture. The whole thing about flying over on the Dreamliner and first class and everything, that made me feel like I kind of had arrived but
Right.
the big part of it was not that part of it. It was just the idea that this is someone that's truly picking me up for me. Not that the other people were just doing me a favor because they knew I could do the job and they wouldn't get embarrassed by my work. But this was like I said, that's when I kind of really knew, hey, there is a life for me outside of the Rolodex, as you would put it, that I can pursue. And that's when I felt like I had arrived. And of course, also the passage of time. As
Sure.
the years go by and you find that, hey, this is sustainable. I think somewhere they said if you can survive the first 5 years, then that's a good sign. Of course, anything can happen after
Sure.
5 years. But, I'm going on 13 years now, still doing it. So I must be doing something right.
You are 2 years away from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics published stats that say they do a 1 year, a 5 year, a 10 year, and a 15-year stat. And the statistic is the likelihood of going out of business. And year 10 is 70% of all businesses that started 10 years before will have failed. That's 70% failure rate. By year 15, it only goes up 10 more percent. It's 80% of all new businesses. You got 2 more years of your probation and then you're free, statistically anyway. But it is an interesting stat because, and thank God I didn't know that when I started my business. Ignorance is definitely bliss. 70% of all businesses ultimately, or 80% rather, of all businesses ultimately fail. And we have to ask ourselves, why? Is business inherently risky? Is it really that dangerous? Because if it is, you actually have a 47 or 42.7% chance of winning blackjack at Vegas statistically, because the dealers have to they can't hit on they have to stay on 17, they have to hit on 16, whatever the rule is. I mean, it's a very calculated game. So you have a 42% chance of winning in blackjack. You have a 20% chance of winning in business. If you're a gambling person, just go to Vegas, or something like that. Not that those are great odds, but they're better. They're twice the as good as business. But I do believe that 80% of all businesses fail, not because business is 80% likely to fail. In general, I think they fail for very similar reasons, because 80% of the founders or the business owners or the people who run it don't adapt the appropriate skills at the scale of their business, right? We all go into business with a certain set of attributes. Mine was, I had a good technical acumen because I designed equipment for the electronics industry. So I had a good technical acumen, good for me, but I knew nothing about business. So the skills, the business skills, so to speak, I brought to the table were arrogance, ego, naivety, a very poor assessment of risk, passion, and all those things. Thank God for all those things, because they got me started. They were the high octane starter fluid down the carburetor. But you can't run on that. I mean, that might get you started. That might make you so arrogant you don't care about the stats, the business stats. You think, well, they're not talking about me. But clearly, I couldn't run a business for very long on ego and arrogance and naivety and all that stuff, bravado and passion. That was great, a great attribute to get started against all odds. But it surely will kill your business. And I think many people believe that whatever skills they brought to the table that were successful in getting them from A to B began to fail them from B to C. And then from C to D and from D to E, all new skill sets are needed for that level of the business, for the scale of the business. And that's where I think that's why the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics has a 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, 15 year, because they know that most businesses by year 10 are at a certain level, and their bag of magic tricks is empty, and they either fail to develop new skills or they fail to acquire through good hiring new skills, and they just can't figure out why what worked yesterday no longer works today and tomorrow. And I think that's the reason businesses fail. I don't think business in itself is inherently risky. I think running a business without the appropriate skill set or team around you with the appropriate skill set is the reason businesses fail. Have you ever had a moment where you thought about throwing in the towel that, okay, uncle, this is it. This is clearly the end. Were you ever close to that edge in your mind?
Um, a little bit, maybe right around the 4 or 5 year mark if I had a dry spell. But what I found that was really helpful was having the awareness
Hmm.
to say, hey, I've had dry spells before
Mm-hmm.
and I work through them. And there's no reason that I can see out there that I can't do it again. Not very strongly. Once I made the commitment, I wanted to see it through.
Yeah.
And my business has never really been in jeopardy or things like that. But as I said, there were certainly growing pains, but as I've described a little bit, just very different. I've always been a self-motivated individual, but you really need to be self-motivated at home. There are times when you don't want to do something, but you need to do it. You talk about changing skill sets, reinventing yourself. You have to be open to making uh, improvements in yourself, not just in what you do, but how you go after business and things like that. But as far as wanting to throw in the towel, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think I'm the same way. I think financially, I was very close to the edge. I think if any outside person came in, an accountant came in, they'd say, start making your end of life plans, business end of life plans now, because you're not going to make it. But mentally, I was too stubborn to admit defeat. I'm glad I didn't, but I don't think anyone would have blamed me if they saw the condition of the company in the early days, because it was definitely dire. But you know, I'm just one of these stubborn people, and I've got a bit of an ego, and I don't think I could face my family or friends, if I had failed, because then I couldn't blame anyone else. I can't say, well, the company went bankrupt, or the stockholders, were too greedy and took giant dividends, and whatever. It would have been me only, and I don't think I was ready. My ego wouldn't let me go down that road. How do you balance the technical side of compensation consulting with the business, with the demands of running a company? You've got two skills now after 13 years. You've got the skill of your trade, compensation stuff, and you've also got a skill in running a business, which is almost separate from your educated, your training. How do you balance running a business and doing all the things that business owners have to do with also providing a very niche service, very technical service?
You have to be very disciplined within yourself to commit the time necessary. One of the challenges I had earlier from a business perspective was how much to pay for my services. Because one of the benefits of using my services would be the fact that I have low overhead. A lot of companies may want to use a giant conglomerate company that does what I do, but they simply can't afford it. So, understanding about how to leverage my lower overhead in a way, and making sure that the invoices go out. Again, it goes back to what we were talking about, Mike, earlier. It's all on you. So you've got to plan out your day, and really be a little bit of a project manager to make sure you get the things done that need to get done, because at any moment you may find yourself overwhelmed with a work project and not have time to do the things that are necessary to keep the business running. Whether it's doing because again, you're not only the CEO, you're also the clerk and the marketing specialist in between. So learning, taking advantage of people out there, learning from them, not taking advantage of them, but learning from them, people that you know.
Yeah.
But it's all about taking the initiative as an independent. And it's also about, again, having that self-discipline to know, okay, this is how I set up my invoices, and this is what's important for my taxes. And do I want to become a corporation, or do I want to remain a sole proprietor? You've got to look at the landscape and see all the different things that you need to do. And a lot of the things, those side things, you just need to be consistent about it. You don't need to be a genius or anything like that, but you need to be aware of those different aspects and take care of them, unless you want to have a staff to do that. And again, I'm working to keep my overhead low. There are people that I can pull in if I had a really big project necessary. But again, and you mentioned the word passion earlier on, and I want to just say on that issue, you mentioned that it was really good at the beginning of your independent or running your own business. I would say keeping that passion level up is the one thing you want to continue to do.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
This is very important. You've got to have because you can move mountains. And yes, there are aspects of the business that I don't really want to deal with, but I do them because, well, I have to, but also that it gives me the opportunity to keep moving forward. And I always am thinking of the next client and what that's going to be like and what kind of opportunities that might be. And that is what really drives me, passion for what I do.
Yeah.
If you don't have that, I think your chances of success are going to be a lot less.
Oh, you can't do it without the passion, for sure. I found myself in an interesting dilemma, perhaps you did too, where I would have 500 things I need to do as a, in the early days of my business, before I really had a team around me of competent people. So I had, 500 things I needed to do. So I'm going to start with 10 of them, all that I want to do. I love doing these 10 things. There's 490 things I don't want to do. But as long as I'm busy working on stuff I love to do, I feel like I'm productive. And then eventually you get through the 10, and then you've picked the next 10 that are slightly less objectionable, and you do that. And at some point, you burn through your list, and all you have is 50 things that you absolutely don't want to do. You've just worked yourself into the worst of it. And the stuff you don't want to do is probably the most important stuff that you should do first. So then eventually you get a team around you, and you hire, an accountant, and they're really good at what they do. And then you hire a production manager, and then you hire a logistics manager, and then you hire a service manager, and you hire a sales manager. That was my experience. And you pay them to solve problems within their department. But ultimately, when the team that you bring on reaches the end of their experience, their talent, they deliver like a cat will deliver a dead bird to your doorstep, or a mouse or whatever. They start to deliver things. Okay, boss, I've taken care of everything, but here are 3 things that I can't fix. And then all of a sudden, I find myself only with really difficult problems that I ultimately need to solve, even though I have a team around me, right? Because they're a good filter, but they're not necessarily capable of handling everything. Sometimes it just has to come back to you. So there's, what I had to learn, which was really hard for me to learn, because I could totally procrastinate, and I justified it by, well, I'm still busy, so it's not like I'm playing video games or going to the beach every day. I'm still working hard every day, 60 hours, 70, 80 hours a week, but I'm only doing what I want to do, and I'm just avoiding everything else. So at some point, we do have to kind of put our big boy pants on and do the things that aren't as fun, that aren't as sexy, that don't seem as rewarding. But I'll tell you, there's nothing more rewarding than a business that runs like clockwork, right? That just almost runs itself. And that doesn't happen without a lot of work from the owner of the business, from the founder of the business. Let's dive into your area of expertise. What's the biggest misconception companies have about compensation design? And in your view, what are the essential elements of a well-designed compensation plan? So let's talk about the biggest misconceptions first, and then we'll get into what does a well-designed comp plan look like?
Well, one of the biggest misconceptions is that, first of all, people don't realize it's part of human resources compensation. And it really does belong there. But a lot of people mistake it somehow that it's accounting
Hmm.
and it's just adding up numbers, a lot of spreadsheets and things like that, where really there's quite a bit of art to compensation. And the reason it's in human resources is because you're dealing directly with people's livelihoods, employees' livelihoods. And so, again, it's a very creative job where yes, you're using data and you're using facts, but you have to tell stories, and there's a lot of gray areas. So the idea that it's just a very numbers driven, almost like accounting, is just that's a misconception that I see out there, and also that they don't often see it as part of human resources. They might think of it as part of the finance world or something, and it's just not like that. It's you're telling stories, you're looking for trends and patterns, you're evaluating a lot of different factors to come up with a decision. It's not all black and white, and it's not going to total up perfectly. A lot of gray areas involved in it. And I find people that go into it, at first they almost freeze when they're trying to figure out what an individual should get paid. And they start to bring in this fact and that fact, and then they're not sure about it. And it's just something over time that if you're going to be successful in this, you learn how to balance, you learn how to use the grays, and not just be so black and white in how you approach it. So that's the biggest misconception I find is just the idea of where it's located and what it actually does.
So, what are the essential elements of a well-designed comp plan?
Um, to me, it's a well-designed comp plan is market-based. There are ways to create a compensation plan that are more based on using a point system or valuing certain jobs that the company needs more than others. And that's all well and good. But to me, market-based is the most transparent. Compensation is often very much in a black box that's in the shadows. So the more that we can be transparent, I think is very important. It's getting more and more objective. But the other piece of that too is always, because it's so important, is linking market-based compensation to career development pathways, because there's no such thing as just an accountant in the marketplace. There are different levels of accountant, all the way from an entry to an intermediate to a senior to an expert. Then there's different people leadership levels. It's really, and when you take these elements of uh, the actual market-based approach and the career development, then you have to link it to the company philosophy. What is the company's philosophy on pay? How do they want to react to the marketplace? Do they want to pay more on variable at-risk pay than the market, but less on base? So really, part of my job, I find, is really listening to the client about learning what their business mission is, learning what they think their compensation philosophy should be. And then I might be able to find some contradictions between that business mission and their compensation philosophy, and to provide them some guidance in that area. But to me, it's this idea of linking career development to market-based pay together. It's not just one thing. It's those two things linked together to form a total reward solution. That to me, and again, then looking at how you customize it for the business mission. it doesn't always fit the same. I have developed all sorts of different pay structures for different companies. They don't all look the same. A lot
Right.
of it depends on this. It doesn't all come from me, in other words.
Yeah.
I can provide the market perspective. I can provide the career development paths that link to that market perspective, but I need to understand the business mission
Sure.
and also the company culture. These
Yeah.
pieces have to be integrated together.
Yeah. And our company culture is such that, we're a small company. We have, you know, at any given time between 30 and 50 employees.
True.
And our culture is quite unique, in that, we pay based on value to the company and not on scale, not on like published scale. Like you're an electrician. Electricians get paid this, and you're a general assembler. Generally, the market pays that. We pay based on need, based on value, kind of ROI, and so we tend to overpay. But we our goal several years ago was to go out and set and bring in what we referred to as a dream team,
Mm-hmm.
and we obviously money's important to us because we still have to, at the end of the day, we have to make enough profit so we can support the customers that we have, right? And
Yeah,
and provide a good
absolutely.
service, and pay our team and invest in R&D and do all the things that we do in our world. So we need to make money, but we devalued compensation. It is less of a consideration when we are looking to bring in the right person than it might be for a assembly line in the auto industry, which is very scale based, right? It pays what it pays based on what level you're at. I think for us as a smaller company, we're kind of blessed with the ability to go off scale and do that. But I mean, we still have our own plan, but we don't fall on our sword over like, oh, you know what, we're 50 cents away, but our policies don't allow us to go up 50 cents because then everyone's going to want 50 cents. And, it's a dangerous game we're playing, but it's worked out for us because we have a larger vision in mind, that, maybe what you do is worth $25 an hour, but Scott, we're going to hire you for 50 because you're not a $25 an hour person. You're going to get us $100 an hour worth of return on that. So we don't force ourselves to go by the industry's preconceived notions of what something pays. It is really good to know that because, we know when we're overpaying, based on what we technically could get, for a person that would just be good enough. But in our world, good enough, everyone's doing good enough. We need to do great. And so we would be an interesting client for you because you would tell us, here's what the industry pays. And then we go, okay, great. We would just bring it up a
Well,
little bit.
yeah, I would say, though, the second part of what I talked about, the career development, is very important because you have that top person that you're talking about and you're paying, and where do they go from there?
Right.
So, yeah, when you first bring them in the door, you may not know all their capabilities and things.
True.
One of the big things that I put into my design, what I call career architecture, is a way to grow that individual as the business grows as well, because you want to take care of your top people, and it's not just about market pay. It's growing them internally to keep them engaged.
Yeah.
So this is the other part of it. The market base is just the first piece. And then comes the career architecture. How are you going to grow this person and how are you going to grow the business over time? So
Yep.
a lot of the structures that I build, they are built to grow with you. They're very robust. They
Yeah.
don't take a snapshot just for today,
Right.
because a year or two from now, you might find you shouldn't have to redo. Some of my clients I've had for a number of years, they're using the same pay structure, just adjusted over time. The same pay structure that I initially put in because it's growing with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a good compensation strategy that works for your company culture and company needs is also can also provide a very competitive edge for employee retention. To your
Oh,
point,
absolutely.
And, it's one thing to bring them in the door. That's one challenge these days, just finding people that are willing to work with you. The other challenge, particularly with the younger generation, is retention, because the current culture of the younger generation, they're less inclined to buy cars. They're more inclined to ride share. They're less inclined to buy a house. They're more inclined to rent. With roommates, maybe they're less inclined to, work, 25 years to retirement at one job. They're very nomadic in many ways, and so retention to me and compensation. I don't think it's 100% compensation based, but certainly compensation is part of it. But hiring people that are really good, that you pay well, that stay is a challenge, and you can kind of mitigate at least part of that challenge by having the right compensation package up front. Is that a correct assessment?
Well, yeah, you can mitigate, but the key is the other piece that's extremely important in all of this is that compensation, as I said, it's linked to human resources. Human resources is not a profit center. It doesn't generate money for the company. And it's often viewed in that sense, well, okay, these are the folks that are taking care of compliance. They're taking care of performance management and training.
Liability mitigation, really, right?
Exactly. But there is one area where human resources, and that's employee engagement. Because when you move the needle on employee engagement in the right direction, they've proven this over and over again. Business results go up. So in anything I do from a compensation perspective, I'm looking at it also from the aspect of how can I design this so that it can act as a accelerator of employee engagement. And that's where the career development comes in. That is where strengthening the relationship between the employee and their immediate manager. And that's where the idea of making HR less of a tactical partner and more of a strategic partner, if HR is giving these tools to managers from a compensation perspective and linking it to career development, this all together can help. And the biggest compliment I ever got was actually from a very large nonprofit who said that some of the programs that I put in help actually move the needle on employee. They did employee engagement surveys and they saw results going up in certain areas over a couple of years. Now, I'm not going to say that that was simply because of what I put in, but it got the dialogue going more about compensation with the immediate manager and the employee. And when you do that, that is key to driving employee engagement. So that meant everything to me because that's making a difference. Why am I in business for myself?
Right.
I want to make a difference. I don't want to just keep a roof over my head, I want to make a difference. So I'm always looking at what I do and figuring out, okay, employee engagement is really important. How can this be increased through the type of programs that I do? Okay. It's like the idea of pay transparency, which is so important. You talk about the younger generation and pay transparency. They want to see more of it than perhaps prior generations did.
It's almost, in my generation, pay was taboo. I remember working for companies that told you when you were hired that if you tell anyone else what you make, it's a zero tolerance. You're instantly fired, right? So that's all everyone wants to know, because it's just, don't look behind this box. Don't look in this box. That's all I want to do is look in the box now. So
well, the thing about that is what we need to do is we need to address this urgency. And what they're doing in some states is passing laws where you have to post the range to potential new hires of the job. But to me, that's just a dead end, because all it is a set of numbers, and the employee can be left with more questions than they have answers. Well,
Right.
where am I going to get paid And why didn't I get paid at this level of the range and everything? And that opens up all.
Right.
We
And
need
does
to
that mean I can
redirect.
never make more? I mean, does that,
Yeah,
are they bookends on both sides? That to me, I would look at the cap. I would look at it more as a cap than a range.
yeah. And what I'm trying to do with my programs is to redirect that interest in pay transparency into the idea of where you're going to be moving. Because as you move along in your career, you're going to grow your pay. And that's something that employees want to hear about. Career development is very important to them. So what I'm saying is the transparency emphasis should be on as the business grows and we have this business need and you plug into that business need and you grow, you're going to grow your pay more than just, all right, we can give you a 2% merit increase this year. Or this year we can give you a 4% merit increase. Again, there's not enough substance to it. It's a little bit of a dead end. We need to lay out the management needs to express what the business need is, and then find people that can support that and grow. Because again, as you grow in an organization, you are going to grow your pay, guaranteed.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Are there differences in compensation expectation between generations? So, in other words, do baby boomers have a different expectation than millennials or Gen Zers?
I think they have a lot of the same expectations. It's just that the prior generations were quieter about it. And I
Yeah, they're not afraid to bring that up, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't mean that necessarily, uh, but I still think that when they're talking about, I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where, okay, here's what Jeff makes and here's what Susan makes and everything, put it up on a board and just everything like that, because people get paid differently based on everybody doesn't come in with it. We're not robots. We have different sets of skills and we grow. Some people grow, they might be in the same job for 10 years and they don't grow in the organization. They're really good at what they do
Right.
and they keep expecting pay increases. But you know what? The market doesn't change that much for what they're doing.
Yeah.
And what we need to communicate is if you want to grow your pay, you need to grow and support the business need in a different way. And Um, so while I think that the new generation, they other things are important to them too. But I think the element that's really missing, I mean, they'll talk about pay, they'll talk about perks and being able to work remote. But my feeling is of what it all ends up coming back to is engagement. They want to feel that their efforts are directly linked to the business. And I feel that when you connect the business need to career development, say the business is going to need this, and that's going to close that gap in terms of employee engagement. They really want to be engaged in what they do. They want to feel part of something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
That's the thing that stands out to me the most, and they're vocal about it. And maybe pay transparency that they will be willing to talk about. It's like Mike, a lot of people when they leave the organization, they'll say, I left for pay because that doesn't ruffle many feathers and things like that. But actually it's only number 7 on the list of why people leave organizations is their pay. Number 7. Okay.
I want to talk about that. Yes,
Yeah.
because I can't tell you how many times I could write the script on it. How many times I have an employee that's been around for several years, and they will, back when I was more involved in the company, they'd come into my office and we'd have the talk, and some such and such company offered me X amount more, and my policy, even to this day, is you know I don't play that game. I'm like,
Mhm.
because we know what we pay. We know we pay above scale. We know what our company culture is. We know what we do for our team, what our team does for us, and I tell people, look, if the sole deciding factor is money, go for it. Go for it. And if things, I hope things work out for you. And if they don't, our door is always open. I say that most of the time. Sometimes it's like, oh, thank God they're leaving, but most of the time it's we're not going to play the game. We're not going to bring an offer in and we'll beat it by 10%. We don't do that. So I've seen people leave. They leave to chase the money, and more than half the time, Scott, I'll get a phone call after maybe 6 months and said, I made a terrible mistake. Can I come back? And we're like, yeah, we're not going to change the salary. We'll just start you where you left off, no problem. And we'll welcome you back with open arms. And what I've learned is, money is important. I'm not diminishing the value of a pay. Obviously, it has to work for them. But it becomes less important. Instead of 100% of the decision, it might be 60% of the decision or 50% of the decision to stay. And it turns out company culture, a sense of well-being, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of value, a sense of camaraderie, a sense of family even, they don't put a monetary value on that. And they don't even frequently realize it had any value until it's gone. And now you are punching a clock and you're getting your $10,000 a year more, and you're not happy. And and I'll tell you, an extra 10,000 isn't going to change. Isn't going to make you happy. That will just get absorbed. You'll change your lifestyle. Eventually, you'll still be where you are now. Because you'll just buy a more expensive car, and there goes that money. So, yeah, I do believe that a fair, equitable compensation plan that's win-win, combined with a company culture that makes people feel part of something bigger than themselves, as you said, is a key. I think it needs both. It needs fair pay, and it needs something that you just can't put a price on. And I don't even know how to define it. I couldn't tell people how to create that culture because every company's different. But we've created one that seems to be very successful for us. And now, keep in mind, we've been around 33 years, so we had plenty of practice at doing it wrong. We finally figured out what works for us, and it's not as contrived as we tried to make it be in the past. It is very organic. It really is. We hire people that we really want to work with personally, that we really want to work with, people who share our values, people who have a similar ideal culture, people who want to be part of something bigger than themselves, bigger than the company, people who want to make the world a better place. As Pollyannish as that sounds, everyone wants to feel part and needed and valued, and money's one way to show it.
And in a small company or in a startup, you have that kind of intimacy. And it's very important. There's a lot of overlap in tasks. So again, if I was designing a compensation plan for a startup, it would look quite different than it would for a medium-sized company. Mm-hmm. Okay? There's different aspects of what you focus on in the pay package. And because in a startup, people wear many different hats, and it may be hard to pinpoint their market value simply on one job because they're wearing many different hats. So that might require a completely different type of pay structure, still market-based, but a different way of approaching pay. And again, pay is a starting point. I'm interested in, yes, I want the market perspective. That's very important to me because I want to have something solid that I can fall back on, but it's the starting point. Then we have to see from there how it fits the organization.
Right.
And
we're starting to run out of time, so I want to ask just two more questions. And
Sure.
The first question of the last two is, what advice would you give to someone who, like you, like me, is working a job? They're ready to take a leap. Maybe they have an idea, but they're just a little uncertain. Maybe there's a little bit of fear. What advice would you give them as a new entrepreneur, as a new business owner, that you wish someone had given you?
Well, it's interesting because after a couple of years, I started writing down on a piece of paper, these are the 12 questions I wish I had asked. And I'm not going to go through all 12 questions here, but these are the kind of 12 questions that I would ask myself before jumping into business. And some of them were very tactical, have have a good chunk of money. I've met some people that went out of business, and the first thing they did was they cashed out their 401k, and they put
Yeah.
their money in it, and they built up beyond what they really needed to do in the first
Right.
place. So some of them are very tactical, have a decent amount of money to live off of because you're not going to have money coming in immediately, most likely. But more importantly, it's how much competition are you going to have? Do you really have a niche that's needed out there? I think that's really important. How far, as I talked about earlier, can your work travel? Um, how much can you expand into different markets with what you do? These are all really important, but most of all, be patient with yourself and have passion for what you do. That sounds very broad and very gray, but it really is true. That'll get you over many a hurdle. If you
Sound
don't have
advice.
it, don't do it.
Yes, I completely agree. And last question, how did you define success before you started your business, and how do you define it today?
How I defined it before I got into the business was I just want to survive. I want to to um, be able to continue to do this um, because I like the idea of having control over my destiny.
Hmm.
So that was the biggest thing, just to be able to 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 do that.
Okay, that's fair.
Um,
Control, that's a good answer. A lot of people say
yeah.
money, but money also buys you some control too. So it's kind of similar. And how do you define
Yeah.
it today?
Um, in self-actualization, it's helped me a lot. I don't want to make it sound like I'm doing something that's that, because I'm not, that earth-shattering or anything like that. But for me, uh, I feel like I've grown a lot in the past 13 years because I've had to do all on my own shoulders, all these different aspects to run a business, and I've done it well enough to keep in business. And if you want to talk about pay, I think except for maybe 1 year, I always have made more on my own than I ever did in corporate. And I had some pretty good corporate paid jobs.
That's great.
So,
That's great.
but it's helped me towards my goal of self-actualization. And I'm not there yet, but it allows me to start opening my mind and thinking about other areas that I want to improve in my life.
That's
That's
a
what
great
it's done for me.
That is
That's what
great.
it's done.
Yeah, that is great. I've never had anyone, by the way, your episode number 2022. So the 21 people before you have had different answers of how they define success before versus now. So I would worry if the answer was how did you define success before? Money. How do you define it today? Money. I'd be like, oh, okay, that's not the answer I'm looking for. But no one has that. Everyone has a completely kind of redefined version of success.
Yeah. Well,
As they have.
contentment doesn't lie in money. I'm old enough to realize that. Uh, it I always say the great thing about money is it makes problems disappear, but uh, it's not. I don't think contentment lies in money or happiness or anything like that. Like I said, it makes problems disappear. That's what's great about it.
Yeah, a lot of times it makes them disappear or it makes them invisible. Doesn't always make it go away, but certainly it makes you kind of immune to the pain of the problem.
Yes.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Scott, it's been great speaking with you. Thank you for your generosity and time and sharing your journey with me and my
Hmm.
audience, and
It's been my
some good
pleasure.
technical nuggets on the concept of compensation and all the stuff that goes on, behind closed doors normally. Thanks for opening the door and shedding some light on that process. And for my guests who are watching or listening to this, if you're on YouTube, look down here somewhere. It says show more, and I'll have information on Scott's company so you can get more information on the services that he provides. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, when it's safe to do so, look at the podcast app, look at the show notes there, and Scott's information will be there as well. Scott, thank you so much for being my guest today. I really appreciate your insight and your willingness to share your journey with me and my audience.
Thank you, Mike, for having me on. It's been my pleasure.
Same here. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Reluctant Entrepreneur Podcast. A special thanks to Scott Trumpolt for being my guest on the show. The Reluctant Entrepreneur Podcast is available on all major podcast sites and on the Reluctant Entrepreneur YouTube channel. We've been busy recording future episodes with fascinating guests, which I'm excited to share with you, so don't miss out. Subscribe to the podcast to be notified when new episodes are released. We release new episodes twice a month on the first and third Tuesday. If you're an entrepreneur or know of an entrepreneur who would like to be a guest on my show, please let me know. Visit mikeconrad.com/podcast and apply to be a guest or to recommend a guest. Just remember, that's Conrad spelled with a K. If you'd like to reach out to me, I always love to hear from you. My email address is mike@mikeconrad.com. Once again, that's Conrad with a K. And a shameless plug, if you're interested in my book, The Reluctant Entrepreneur, Anatomy of a Business Startup from Uncertainty to Unstoppable, it's available as a paperback as well as a Kindle version, both available on Amazon, and as an audiobook on both Audible and Amazon. Thanks again for listening or watching. Until I see you again, be unstoppable.